I am Marcus Fletcher, 67 years old, and this is the story of how I lost a daughter but reclaimed my soul. At my only daughter's wedding, her fiancé pulled a chair out from under me as I was about to sit, sending me crashing to the floor in front of 250 of their wealthy guests. He laughed and told everyone that's where I belonged. What he didn't know was that he was speaking to the silent majority owner of his entire family's fortune. And by the end of the night, he would learn his lesson when his own father, with a look of sheer terror, bowed his head and asked me for forgiveness. Before I tell you how I turned their perfect day into the beginning of their ruin, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from in the world. And be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that true respect is something money can never buy. The decay began slowly like rot in the foundation of a house. It started on a Tuesday evening when I heard the crunch of expensive tires on my gravel driveway. That sound was an intruder here in my quiet Boston neighborhood, where homes are built from brick and memory, not glass and steel. My house, the one where I raised my Alara alone after my wife Lila passed, suddenly felt too small, too simple. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books seemed to fight a losing battle against the designer fragrance that wafted in from the doorway. Alara came in first, my daughter, the light of my life. She looked tense, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Right behind her was Colton. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a suit I knew cost more than my monthly pension. He didn't look at me. He looked through things, his cold blue eyes scanning the family photos on my mantelpiece, my grandfather's old pendulum clock, his gaze lingering for a moment on the worn living room rug. A nearly invisible sneer touched his lips. It wasn't a greeting, it was an appraisal. "Hello, Dad," Alara said, her voice a little too high. She gave me a quick, stiff hug. "This is Colton. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Fletcher," Colton said, extending a hand. His handshake was limp and cool. He called me Mr. Fletcher, not Marcus. A calculated distance. We gathered around the oak dining table, the same table where my family of three had shared every meal. Now a stranger sat with us, and his presence made the room feel tight, suffocating. Alara tried to make small talk, asking about my garden, mentioning old neighbors, but the conversation faltered, dying in the spaces between her words. Colton gave one-word answers, his eyes constantly flicking down to the Swiss watch on his wrist. He was a man waiting for the real event to start, and this dinner was merely a tedious formality. Then, after the main course, he placed his fork down with a sense of finality. The performance was about to begin. "Mr. Fletcher," he started, his condescending tone cutting through the quiet. "Alara and I have some exciting news. We've decided to get married." He said it like he was announcing a corporate merger. No warmth, no joy. Alara wasn't looking at me. She was studying the wood grain on the tabletop as if it held the secrets of the universe. I forced a smile, the muscles in my face feeling stiff. "Well, that's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both." "Thanks, Dad," Alara whispered to the table. "We've set a date," Colton continued, taking full command. "Next May at the Grand Hyatt downtown. I've already booked the grand ballroom. We're expecting about 250 guests, mostly business associates of my family, of course." He laid out the plans in a monologue, leaving me no space to interject, to ask a question, to feel like a father. I felt like a minority shareholder in my own daughter's life. A pang of grief hit me as I thought of Lila. She would have wanted a wedding in our backyard, surrounded by her hand-planted flowers and our closest friends. That dream, I realized, had died with her. But a father's instinct is strong no matter what I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be a part of her day. "Colton," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I have some money saved up. I've worked hard my whole life. I want to help pay for things for my girl." It was my and Lila's savings. The money we'd put away for a trip to Europe we never got to take. The money I had guarded like a final sacred piece of our shared dreams. Colton looked at me for the first time all evening. He truly looked at me. Then he chuckled. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a short, dismissive burst of air from the back of his throat. "Oh, Mr. Fletcher, that's cute." He said the word cute dripping with condescension. "But I don't think that will be necessary. You just hold on to your pocket money. A single plate of food at this event will likely cost more than that. My family has it covered. Pocket money." The air left the room. The The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. I looked at Alara, pleading with my eyes. Say something, defend my dignity. But she didn't. She stared at her plate, a lock of hair falling to hide her flushed face. Her silence was a deeper cut than Colton's words. In that moment, I understood. My daughter wasn't just marrying a man, she was marrying into his world. A world where her old father, the retired mechanical engineer, had no currency. I was no longer the rock of her life. I had become something else, an embarrassment, something to be managed. I stood up and began clearing the plates. Let me get dessert, I said, my voice thick. I had to get away from that table before they saw the heartbreak in my eyes. As I turned my back, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. The rot was just getting started. 2 weeks later, Alara dragged me to a suit shop with a name I couldn't pronounce. The air inside was heavy with the smell of expensive leather and entitlement. Suits hung on racks like museum pieces, each one costing more than a year's rent. Colton was already there, sipping an espresso, looking as if he owned the place. He scanned me from head to toe. I was wearing my best suit, the one I'd worn to Lila's funeral. It was well-made. The fabric was good, but in Colton's world, it was an antique. Well, Mr. Fletcher, he said, a smug grin playing on his lips. I didn't realize we were attending a 90s theme party. I clenched my fists at my sides. This is my best suit, Colton. I can see that he replied, his tone like he was speaking to a child. He snapped his fingers, summoning a salesman in a perfectly tailored outfit. Find something for this gentleman. More current charcoal gray Italian, cut slim fit. Get him the best you have. The salesman led me to a fitting room. I felt like an imposter. When I put on the new suit, I had to admit it fit like a glove. But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked slick, foreign, and hollow. I walked out. Alara gasped. Oh, Dad, you look amazing. But Colton just nodded professionally. An improvement, he declared. He walked over and adjusted my lapels, a gesture of pure dominance. At least now you won't look completely out of place standing next to my father. When we got to the register, I pulled out my wallet. This was a matter of honor. I'll pay for this, I said firmly. Colton placed his hand over mine, a light patronizing tap. No need, Mr. Fletcher, consider it a gift. He turned to the salesman. Put it on my account. He can't afford it. He said it just loud enough for the other customers to hear. Heat rushed to my face. Alara quickly said, Colton, don't. But it was too late. The humiliation was already hanging in the air. I tried to hand my credit card to the cashier, but Alara gently pushed my hand down. Let it go, Dad, she whispered. Just let Colton handle it. Don't make things complicated. Don't make things complicated. As if my dignity was an unnecessary complication. As we were about to leave, Colton stopped. He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to me. Hear this too, so you don't look so lost. I opened it. Inside was a tie clip. It was supposed to look like silver, but it was light and flimsy, the kind of cheap trinket you'd find in a tourist shop. It was a stark contrast to the $1 to $200 suit he just bought me. I understood instantly. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. He could dress me in expensive clothes, but in his eyes, I was still only worthy of cheap things. He was reminding me of my place. I silently took the box and walked out of the store. The Boston breeze felt colder than usual. I knew I hadn't just been fitted for a suit. I had been fitted for a new role, the poor, embarrassing father-in-law, and my daughter had just stood by and let it happen. The phone call came on a Tuesday night. I was watching old home videos of Lila, a sad ritual I couldn't seem to break. On the screen, she was laughing, her smile lighting up the whole world. Then the phone rang. It was Alara. Hey, Dad, she began, her voice hesitant. I knew immediately that something was wrong. What is it, sweetheart? There was a long pause. I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end of the line. Dad, Colton and I were talking about everyone's roles at the wedding. Oh, am I still walking you down the aisle? I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Yes, of course you are, she said quickly. But about the speeches at the reception? Another pause. Colton thinks, well, he thinks it would be better if we skip the family speeches. He wants to keep things modern and streamlined. He's worried you might tell old stories and make the guests feel awkward. Old stories. The memories of me teaching Alara to ride her bike, of the first time she brought a boy home, of the pride Lila and I felt at her college graduation. All of that to Colton was just old and awkward. My throat felt tight. I understand I lied. And there's one more thing, Dad. She continued, her voice barely a whisper. Now the hotel has a separate entrance for the service staff and the band. It leads right to the reception area. Colton thinks it would be more convenient if you use that entrance, to avoid any unnecessary attention in the main lobby before the ceremony starts. This time, I couldn't lie. The humiliation was cold and sharp. He didn't just want me to be silent. He wanted me to be invisible. He wanted to hide me. I looked at the television screen. Lila was still laughing, oblivious. She had always told me, "You'll give the most beautiful speech at Alara's wedding, Marcus. You'll make everyone cry." That dream, like so many others, had just turned to dust. "All right, Alara," I said, my voice now completely devoid of warmth. "If that's what you both want." I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. I didn't want to hear her weak apologies. I didn't want to hear her make excuses for her fiancé. I sat there in the dark, the sound of my wife's laughter from the past echoing in the empty room. And for the first time since she died, I felt truly, completely alone. The day before the wedding, I drove to the Grand Hyatt. The place was a palace from another world with uniformed doormen and gleaming marble floors. I just wanted to see the hall, where my daughter would be married to, feel the space before I was shuffled into it through a back door. I hadn't even made it to the main lobby when a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Colton. He was wearing a polo shirt from some exclusive golf club, looking relaxed and smug. "Mr. Fletcher." "What a surprise," he said, but his tone said otherwise. He had been waiting for me. "Are you lost?" "I came to see the venue," I answered flatly. "No need. I'll show you to your table tomorrow. It's an easy one to find." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I'm glad I ran into you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and shoved it into my jacket pocket. "Here's a little pocket money," he said, his voice low, as if bestowing a great favor. "For tomorrow, so you can tip a waiter or buy yourself a drink if you need to. I don't want you to feel out of place." The envelope felt like a lead weight against my chest. This wasn't kindness, it was control. He was making me a dependent, someone he needed to take care of. And a little piece of advice, he continued, patting my shoulder in that way a boss pats an underling. "Tomorrow, just stay at your table. Don't wander around and bother my guests. They're very important people. You understand what I'm saying, right?" I looked him straight in his cold blue eyes. There was no respect there, only calculation. He didn't see a father. He saw a potential problem that needed to be managed. I said nothing. I just gave him a slow, deliberate nod. He was satisfied. "Good. I knew you'd understand." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the opulent lobby. I stood alone on the sidewalk, my hand clutching the envelope in my pocket. The city wind whipped between the tall buildings. I pulled the envelope out and opened it. Inside was a thick stack of brand new $100 bills. He had planned this humiliation down to the last detail. In that moment, the patience I had clung to for months finally shattered. The sadness curdled into something harder, colder. The endurance was over. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. This was about honor. And I would not let him or anyone trample on mine. I put the envelope back in my pocket, not to be spent, but to be kept as evidence. Evidence of his monumental arrogance. Tomorrow at my daughter's wedding, a show would take place. But it wouldn't be the one Colton had written. It would be mine. The ballroom at the Grand Hyatt was transformed into something resembling a cathedral made of flowers and crystal. Thousands of white roses and orchids cascaded from the ceiling, their scent so overpowering it felt heavy, artificial. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a delicate soundtrack to the hushed whispers of money and influence that filled the room. The guests were a sea of designer dresses and tailored tuxedos, people whose lives were as polished as the marble floors beneath their feet. It was beautiful, sterile, and had absolutely nothing to do with my daughter Alara, or at least the daughter I thought I knew. They had placed my seat in the last row behind a large floral arrangement that partially obscured my view. I was technically present, a name on the seating chart, but I was designed to be overlooked. From my vantage point, I could see the heads of Colton's parents, Harlan and his wife, in the front row. I saw his uncles and aunts all seated in places of honor. I, the father of the bride, was seated further back than some of Colton's distant business acquaintances. I adjusted the cheap tie clip he had given me. It felt like a brand, a label that read, unimportant. I was a ghost at my own daughter's wedding, a silent witness to a transaction I had no part in. Then the music swelled and Alara appeared at the end of the aisle. She was stunning in her white dress, a vision that made my heart ache, with a love so fierce it almost choked me. I walked her down the aisle on autopilot, my arm linked with hers, but she felt a million miles away. When I handed her over to Colton at the altar, I squeezed her hand one last time, a silent plea. Look at me, my child. But she wouldn't. During the vows, her eyes were locked on Colton. She recited the words she had memorized, her voice clear and steady. I watched her face, searching for a flicker, a glance, a single moment of connection. I wanted to see her look back at me, the man who had raised her just once, but her gaze never wavered. It was as if I wasn't there at all. As the minister pronounced them man and wife, and the room erupted in polite applause, the feeling finally solidified inside me. I was not the father of the bride. I was simply a guest, an inconvenient, slightly embarrassing guest, who had been tucked away in the back out of sight. The sadness I had been fighting for months gave way to a cold, hard clarity. This was not my family anymore. This was a new entity, a corporation with Colton as the CEO, and I had just been made redundant. And in that moment, I knew I would not be leaving this wedding quietly. The reception was in full swing. The air thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and floral arrangements buzzed with the sound of 250 conversations happening at once. Glasses clinked, kid silverware scraped against fine china, and the string quartet had been replaced by a live band playing smooth, inoffensive jazz. Laughter echoed off the high gilded ceilings. It was a celebration, but it felt more like a performance of happiness than the real thing. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of someone else's life. My assigned table number 32 was tucked away in the furthest corner of the cavernous ballroom, next to a service exit and behind a large potted palm tree. It was the table for afterthoughts, for inconvenient relatives. Taking a deep breath, I began my long walk across the polished dance floor. Every step felt heavy. I kept my eyes down, feeling the gazes of the other guests on my back. I was an anomaly in their world of inherited wealth and effortless privilege. An old black man in a borrowed suit, a relic from a life they couldn't possibly imagine. Just as I reached the table, a voice boomed from behind me, startling me. "Mr. Fletcher, let me get that for you." It was Colton. He had a wide, artificial smile plastered on his face, a champagne flute in one hand. He was playing the part of the gracious host, the attentive son-in-law, for all the watching eyes. His performance was flawless. He moved with a practiced ease, pulling out the chair for me with a grand theatrical gesture. "Here you are, Dad," he said, using the word dad for the first time. It sounded foreign and sharp coming from his lips, a word he used as a prop in his little play. I was tired of fighting, tired of the constant, subtle warfare. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a peace offering, a moment of public decency. So I gave him a small, weary nod of thanks and turned to sit down. The moment my weight shifted, the chair vanished. It wasn't there. Colton had pulled it back at the last possible second. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but air beneath me. My body, all 67 years of it, plunged downwards. My hands flailed, grasping at nothing. There was a collective gasp from the nearby tables, a sudden sharp intake of breath that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Then came the sickening thud of my body hitting the hard marble floor. My hip, a blinding electric shock. For a moment I just lay there, the wind knocked out of me, staring up at the glittering chandeliers. The entire ballroom had fallen silent. 250 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. The old man sprawled on the floor. The jazz band faltered, a lone saxophone note hanging in the air before dying out. The silence was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of shock and disbelief. Then Colton's voice sliced through it loud and clear. "Oops, my mistake," he bellowed, and then he delivered the line he had clearly been rehearsing. "I guess your place is on the floor after all." A beat of silence followed, and then a wave of laughter broke out. It wasn't everyone. It was the younger guests, his friends, his sycophants, all eager to be in on the cruel joke. Their laughter was sharp and ugly, echoing in the vast room. It was the sound of pack animals turning on the weak. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, the pain in my hip now a dull, throbbing ache. I looked for my daughter. I found her standing near the head table, a statue carved from ice. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a horror she couldn't conceal. But she didn't move. She didn't run to me. She didn't scream at her new husband. She just stood there paralyzed as silent accomplice to my public humiliation. Her inaction was the final, deepest betrayal. It was the blow that hurt more than the fall. But then something shifted. The laughter began to die down, sputtering out as a new figure moved through the crowd. It was Harlan Whitaker, Colton's father. His face, usually a controlled mask of corporate authority, was pale and rigid. He wasn't walking. He was striding, his movements urgent, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that silenced everyone he passed. He ignored his laughing son. He ignored my frozen daughter. He moved with a singular, desperate purpose. The crowd parted for him as he approached the corner where I lay. He stopped a few feet away, his chest heaving slightly. The look on his face wasn't pity or anger. It was something else entirely. It was disbelief, awe, and something that looked terrifyingly like fear. The powerful CEO of Whitaker Innovations looked down at me, the broken old man on the floor, and his carefully constructed composure completely shattered. He took a hesitant step forward, leaning down slightly. His voice, a hoarse, trembling whisper that seemed to carry across the entire silent room. "Sir, is that you, Mr. Fletcher?" Ignoring the whispers and the sea of stunned faces, Harlan Whitaker rushed to my side. He didn't offer a hand. He practically knelt, his movements filled with a desperate urgency that was shocking to behold. He gently, respectfully placed his hands under my arms and helped me to my feet as if I were made of fragile glass. He brushed a speck of dust from my shoulder with a trembling hand, his eyes filled with a profound, unreadable emotion. Throughout this, he never once looked at his son. Colton, who was still standing there with a stupid, fading smirk on his face, was rendered completely invisible. "Dad, what are you doing?" Colton stammered, his bravado finally cracking. Harlan acted as if he hadn't heard a thing. His entire world had narrowed to me. Once I was on my feet, I met Harlan's gaze. The panic in his eyes was unmistakable. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between us that spanned 3 decades. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." He began, his voice raspy. I raised a single hand and he fell silent. "I'm the father of the bride, Harlan." I said, my voice low and steady, each word carefully chosen, just the father of the bride. "And I came here today expecting a certain baseline of respect, an agreement we made a long time ago." A cold sweat broke out on Harlan's forehead. He understood exactly what I was saying. I wasn't talking about the wedding. I was talking about the very foundation his entire life was built upon. I straightened the suit he had paid for. I ran a hand over my lapels, smoothing out the wrinkles from the fall. Then I turned my head and looked at my daughter Alara. She was still frozen in place, tears silently streaming down her face. She looked like a heartbroken child, but she was a woman who had made a choice. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was not a nod of forgiveness. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a final goodbye to the girl she used to be. And then without another word to anyone, I turned and began to walk away. I didn't rush. My hip throbbed with a dull pain, but I forced myself to walk with a steady, unhurried gait. My silence was my statement. It was louder than any accusation, more powerful than any curse. The entire ballroom watched me go, the only sound the soft, rhythmic tap of my shoes on the marble floor. It was the sound of a king abdicating his throne, leaving his subjects to deal with the chaos he left behind. I was halfway to the exit when Colton's voice, now laced with a mixture of anger and confusion, cut through the silence. "Dad, what the hell is going on? Who is that old man?" He grabbed his father's arm. Harlan spun around, his face contorted with a fury I had never seen on him before. He violently shook off his son's hand. "You fool!" He hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You arrogant, blind fool. You have no idea what you've just done." "But Dad, it was just a joke." Colton pleaded, his voice cracking. "A joke?" Harlan's laugh was a harsh, broken sound. He looked at his son with utter contempt. You didn't just play a joke, Colton. You just detonated a bomb in the middle of our lives. Now shut your mouth and stay out of my way. With that, Harlan turned his back on his son and his new daughter-in-law and hurried after me, his footsteps echoing my own, the sound of a man desperately chasing after his own salvation. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic, the street lights, or the familiar turn onto my street. The next thing I knew, I was standing in my quiet living room, the silence a welcome relief after the cacophony of the wedding. My hip was a dull, persistent ache, a physical reminder of the deeper invisible wound that had been inflicted. My phone began to buzz on the hall table, the screen lighting up with Alara's name. It buzzed once, twice a frantic, desperate vibration. I watched it, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. Let it buzz. Her voice was the last thing I wanted to hear. Her silence at the wedding had told me everything I needed to know. The phone finally stopped, and the silence returned heavier this time. It buzzed again a few minutes later. Colton's name this time. I let out a short, harsh laugh. The arrogance of the man was truly boundless. I let it go to voicemail just as I had with my daughter's call. They had made their choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. I walked over to my old roll-top desk, the one that had belonged to my father. My hands were steady as I unlocked a small, deep drawer. I didn't reach for a bottle of bourbon or an old pistol. I reached for an old leather-bound address book. My fingers stained with a lifetime of grease and oil traced over the faded names until I found the one I was looking for. Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't just my lawyer, he was one of the few people in the world who knew the truth of my life. I picked up my landline, the familiar weight of the receiver a comfort in my hand, and dialed the number from memory. It was well past midnight, but I knew he would answer. He always did. The phone rang only once. Elias, he said, his voice instantly alert, no trace of sleep. It's Marcus, I said. A pause on the other end. I knew what you were going to say before you even said it, Elias replied, his tone grim. I saw a video clip online. It's already spreading. Marcus, are you all right? I'm fine, Elias. Better than I've been in years. There was another pause. What do you need? He asked. I need you to set up a meeting, I said. Tomorrow morning, your office. I want Harlan Whitaker there. I want Colton Whitaker there. And I want my daughter Alara there as well. It's time. After the call, I walked over to the bookshelf, my feet moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out a heavy photo album, its pages yellowed with age. I flipped through the pictures of Alara's childhood of Lila and me on our own wedding day until I found the one I was looking for. It was a faded photograph from nearly 28 years ago. In it, a much younger me with thick black hair and a confident smile stood with my arm around a nervous-looking young man with a cheap suit and a desperate look in his eyes. That young man was Harlan Whitaker. I wasn't an engineer back then, not just an engineer. I was also an inventor. I had just sold a patent for a new type of hydraulic valve system, a design that would go on to be used in thousands of applications across the country. It had made me a wealthy man overnight, but I had seen what sudden wealth did to people. I wanted Alara to grow up grounded to value hard work and character, not trust funds and privilege. So I made a choice. I would live simply, and I would invest my money quietly under a different name. Harlan Whitaker was my first investment. His small tech startup was on the verge of bankruptcy. He was brilliant, but he was a terrible businessman. I saw the potential, but I also saw the hunger in his eyes, the ambition that could easily curdle into greed. I met with him not as Marcus Fletcher, the engineer, but as the architect, a silent investor. I saved his company. I gave him the capital he needed to build his empire. I took a 52% stake, a controlling interest, and placed it in an ironclad trust named after my wife, Lila. My one condition was simple, a gentleman's agreement. He could run the company. He could become a titan of industry, but he and his family must always operate with two core principles: respect and humility. For 28 years, he had honored that agreement. But tonight, his son had taken that agreement and thrown it onto a marble floor along with my dignity. He had let his son grow into an arrogant monster, a boy who thought his wealth made him a king, and he had forgotten who had built the kingdom in the first place. I closed the photo album. The ache in my hip was still there, but it was no longer a sign of weakness. It was a fuel. The quiet, simple life I had built for myself was not a result of failure. It was a result of choice. The choice to protect my daughter from the very poison that now ran through the veins of the man she had just married. The man whose entire pampered existence was funded by the quiet work of the old man he had just tried to humiliate. Colton didn't just pull a chair out from under me. He had pulled the chair out from under his entire family. And tomorrow morning, in a quiet, air-conditioned law office, they were all about to hit the floor. The sun had barely risen, casting long, distorted shadows across my living room floor when the frantic banging started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of pure desperation, a rapid, insistent pounding that rattled the old wooden door in its frame. I had been sitting in my armchair in the dark, a cup of black coffee growing cold in my hands, waiting. I knew he would come. I opened the door to find Harlan Whitaker standing on my porch, a man utterly undone. The bespoke suit he wore was rumpled. His silver hair was disheveled and his face was a ghastly shade of pale. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by the raw, terrified face of a man staring into an abyss. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. "Marcus, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. He looked past me into the simple interior of my home, as if seeing it for the first time. "We need to talk." You can't do this, my son. He's a fool. An arrogant, spoiled fool. I know that, but please don't destroy everything over this. I'll make him apologize. He'll get on his knees. Whatever you want, just name it." His pleading was pathetic, but I felt no pity, only a cold, hard sense of inevitability. I stepped back and held the door open. "Come in, Harlan. You look like you could use a glass of water." He stumbled inside, collapsing onto the sofa, a man deflated. I handed him the water, and he drank it in one long, shuddering gulp. I sat down in my armchair opposite him, the same chair where I had made the decision to change the course of all our lives just hours before. I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. He was the one who had come here begging, so he would be the one to speak first. It was my house, my terms. "I'm not going to destroy anything, Harlan," I said. Finally, my voice calm and measured. "You two already did that last night. You destroyed a promise we made in a dusty little diner 28 years ago. Do you even remember it?" He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He remembered the two principles I continued pressing my advantage, the only two things I asked for in exchange for saving your entire world: respect and humility. "You have failed on both counts. You let your son grow into a monster, Harlan. You stood by and watched him rot from the inside out with the wealth I provided. And yesterday, you let him aim that rot at me. That was your final mistake." Tears welled in Harlan's eyes. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I didn't know, Marcus," he choked out. "I swear to God I didn't know it was you. For 28 years I've wondered. I've laid awake at night trying to figure out who the architect was. I never in a million years would have guessed." He trailed off, his voice thick with a despair that was almost absolute. He began to speak not to me, but to the ghosts in the room, the story pouring out of him like a confession he had been holding in for half his life. "I was 28 years old. He began, his voice a low murmur. My company, my father's legacy, was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. I had leveraged everything. I was about to lose it all. I had a wife, a baby boy on the way. Colton. I was desperate. I had been turned down by every bank, every venture capitalist in the city. They said my ideas were sound, but my business plan was a mess. They were right. I was a good engineer, but a terrible CEO. I was sitting in that diner staring at my last $10 when you walked in. You were just a guy in a simple work shirt. You sat down in my booth and said you'd overheard my phone call with the bank. You said you had a proposition. You never told me your name. You just called yourself the architect. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding. You told me you'd been following my work. You believed in the technology. But you said you didn't invest in technology. You invested in people. You gave me a check that night, Marcus. A check for $450,000. It felt like all the money in the world. It saved me. But it came with conditions I'd never heard of before. You didn't want a seat on the board. You didn't want quarterly reports. You wanted 52% of the company placed in a blind trust. You told me the trust would be named Lila. I never knew why. He choked on a sob. Now I do. You said I could run the company as if it were my own. I could build it into an empire. I would be the face of it all. All you asked for in return was that I build it and my family on a foundation of humility and respect. You said if I ever lost sight of that, if my ambition ever curdled into arrogance, the architect would return to collect on his investment. He was openly weeping now, the words tumbling out. I tried Marcus. For years, I really tried. I remembered where I came from. But the money, it changes you. It insulates you. And Colton, I gave him everything I never had. I thought I was being a good father, but I wasn't. I was creating a prince. I was building a monster in my own home, and I was too blind, too busy, too proud to see it. I forgot the promise I made in that diner. I forgot about the quiet man who saved my life and asked for nothing in return but my integrity last night when I saw you on that floor, and Colton was laughing. It all came crashing down. I knew in that single horrifying moment, I knew that the architect had finally returned, and I knew that I had failed the only man I was ever truly accountable to. He looked at me, his face a ruin of regret and terror. I failed you, Marcus, and I have destroyed my family. Elias Thorne's law office was on the 40th floor of a skyscraper that pierced the Boston skyline. The conference room was a sterile box of glass and chrome with a panoramic view of a city that suddenly felt very small. The air inside was cold, recycled, and utterly devoid of emotion. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table. Elias, my lawyer, sat beside me, a stack of leather-bound documents placed neatly in front of him. Harlan Whitaker sat opposite us, his face gray and haggarded. He hadn't said a word since arriving. Next to him, my daughter Alara stared at her hands, her face pale and tear-streaked. The final member of our party. Colton strode in 10 minutes late, a cup of expensive coffee in his hand, and a look of profound irritation on his face. He was still wearing the clothes from the wedding reception, looking rumpled and entitled. He didn't sit down. He paced behind his chair, looking at me with a smirk. All right, old man, what's this all about? You dragged us all the way down here at 9:00 in the morning. Are you trying to sue me for assault? You want to pay out for your little tumble, is that it? He chuckled. Fine. How much do you want 50 grand to 100 red? Name your price. I'm sure my father will write you a check just to make this whole embarrassing episode go away. Alara flinched at his words, but said nothing. Harlan didn't even look at his son. He just stared at the polished surface of the table as if it were the gaping mouth of hell. I remained silent. I just looked at him, letting his arrogance fill the room, letting it hang in the air like a thick, toxic smoke. He was still performing, still playing the king. He had no idea he was a jester standing on a trap door. Elias Thorne cleared his throat, a small, precise sound that cut through Colton's blustering. If everyone is ready, he said, his voice flat and professional, we can begin. He opened the first document. We are gathered here today to discuss the ownership structure of Whitaker Innovations Incorporated. Colton rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake, what does that have to do with him? He gestured dismissively at me. Elias ignored him. As of this morning, he continued. Whitaker. Innovations is a privately held corporation with one majority shareholder. That shareholder controls the company through a private family trust. Colton scoffed. Yeah, the Whitaker Family Trust. My father is the trustee. This is all very boring. Can we get to the part where you tell us how much money you want? Elias looked up from his papers, his gaze meeting Colton's for the first time. His eyes were like chips of ice. Actually, Mr. Whitaker, you are mistaken, he said. The Whitaker Family Trust is a minority shareholder. It holds 48% of the company's voting shares. The other 52%, the controlling interest, is held by a different entity. It is a blind trust established 28 years ago. It is called the Lila Trust. A flicker of confusion crossed Colton's face. What? That's impossible. I've seen the corporate filings. My father controls the company. He turned to Harlan. Dad, what is this clown talking about? Harlan didn't move, didn't speak. He was a statue of shame. Colton's voice rose a note of hysteria creeping in. This is insane. Some kind of shakedown. You can't just invent some fake trust and claim you own half our company. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This is his doing, isn't it? The old man is trying to blackmail us. You won't get a dime, you hear me? Not one damn dime. Elias Thorne remained perfectly calm. He slid a document across the table. This is the founding charter for the Lila Trust. He said it is dated September 12th, 1993. You will note it is the legal instrument that holds 52% of the shares of Whitaker Innovations. He then slid a second document over, and this is the legal declaration of the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Lila Trust, the person with absolute and total control over that 52%. His name is Mr. Marcus Fletcher. Colton stared at the papers, his face turning from red to a blotchy white. He snatched them up. This is a forgery, a complete fabrication. He laughed a high, unhinged sound. My father would never sign something like this. You have no proof. My father will sue you into oblivion. Elias leaned back in his chair. That will be difficult, he said calmly, because your father's signature is on the founding charter, as is his thumbprint taken at the time of signing for biometric verification. We also have the original wire transfer records from the architect's private bank to your father's failing company. And finally, we have the original contract. He placed the final document on the table with a soft thud. It was old. The paper yellowed at the edges. On the last page were two signatures. One belonged to a young, desperate Harlan Whitaker. The other, bold and clear, belonged to Marcus Fletcher. And next to my signature was my own thumbprint, a perfect, undeniable match. Checkmate. Colton stared at the papers, his mouth hanging open. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief. Elara let out a small, strangled sob. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying, dawning comprehension. She wasn't just looking at her father. She was looking at a complete stranger. Harlan finally broke. A deep, guttural sound escaped his throat, and he slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, his body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The king had fallen. I let the silence sit for a long moment, letting them all drown in the wreckage of their world. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the sterile room. You wanted to know how much money I wanted, Colton. I began. The answer is nothing. I don't want your money because it was never your money to begin with. It was always mine. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and blank with shock. You live in a penthouse apartment. You drive a luxury sports car. You wear 1,000 suits and threw yourself a wedding that cost more than I made in 10 years of hard work. You have lived a life of unimaginable privilege, but you didn't earn any of it. You are not a self-made man. You are a charity case. You are the beneficiary of a 28-year-long investment I made in your father. He was a brilliant man with a failing company, and I gave him a second chance. All of it, Colton. Every vacation, every expensive meal, every drop of champagne you drank last night was paid for by the man you humiliated, the old man whose place you said was on the floor. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city I had helped build in my own quiet way. I am the architect. I built the foundation of your entire life. And what did you build on top of it? Nothing. You built a monument to your own arrogance. You saw me a retired engineer who lives in a simple house. And you saw a man who was beneath you. You never once stopped to consider my character, my history, my worth as a human being. You only saw my bank account, and you found it lacking. That is the fundamental flaw in you, Colton. You confuse wealth with worth, and you have neither. The silence in the room was broken by a choked sob. It was Elara. She had been staring at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes, but now the tears she had been holding back finally broke free. She looked from me to the mountain of documents on the table, then to the broken figure of Harlan Whitaker, and finally back to me. Her entire reality had been dismantled in the span of 15 minutes. Why she whispered, her voice trembling so quiet I could barely hear her. Why would you hide this from me, Dad? Why would you let me believe? Why would you let me live a lie? I turned from the window to face my daughter. The pain in her eyes was a mirror of my own. I walked back to the table, but I didn't sit down. I stood there looking down at the daughter I had raised, the woman she had become. Because it was never about the money. Elara? I said, my voice softer now, filled with a sorrow that ran deeper than anger. It was about you. I wanted you to grow up without the poison that wealth can be. I wanted you to learn the value of hard work, of kindness, of character. I wanted you to build a life based on who you were, not what you had. And I wanted you to choose a partner who loved you for those same reasons. This money, it was always going to be yours one day. But it came with a test, a silent, lifelong test of your judgment. I needed to know that you could see the true measure of a man, that you wouldn't be blinded by shiny things. I needed to know that the values your mother and I taught you were stronger than the allure of a penthouse and a fancy car. I let you live what you thought was a normal life so you could make a normal human choice. And you chose him. You chose a man who mocked your father's home. You chose a man who tried to buy my dignity with a cheap suit and then silence me. You stood by and watched him humiliate me. You failed the test, sweetheart. Not because you didn't know about the money, but because you didn't know a good man when you saw one. As the weight of my words settled, Colton's panic finally ignited. The blank shock on his face curdled into a desperate, grasping fear. "No," he stammered, looking wildly between me and his father. "No, this can't be real. It's a trick." He turned to Alara, his voice suddenly pleading, syrupy sweet. "Baby, don't listen to him. I love you. This doesn't change anything between us. It's just money. We can work with this." He was babbling now, his composure completely gone. "We can make this right, sir." "Mr. Fletcher." "Marcus, I'm sorry. I was an idiot, a complete fool. I respect you. I really do. I was trying to impress my friends. It was a joke, a stupid, terrible joke. Let me make it up to you. I'll do anything." His eyes darted around the room, searching for a lifeline, a friendly face, and finding none. He was a drowning man, and the water was rising fast. He finally understood that he wasn't a player in a game. He was the pawn being sacrificed. Just as Colton started to move toward me, a hand shot out and grabbed his arm. It was Harlan. He rose from his chair, his face no longer a mask of grief, but of cold, hard resolve. He looked like the CEO again, but this time all of his authority was directed at his own son. "Enough," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You will not speak to this man again. You have done enough damage. But Dad, we have to fix this." Colton whined, trying to pull his arm free. Harlan's grip was like iron. "There is no we," he said, the words falling like chips of ice. "There is only you. You are a disgrace to my name. You are a disgrace to the memory of your grandparents. You embody every single thing I promised him I would never become. You are the failure of my life's work." He turned up at me, his eyes filled with a terrible final clarity. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, his voice formal and steady. 28 years ago, you made an investment in me. Today, I am cutting my losses." He turned back to Colton. "You are no longer my son. You are cut off. Your credit cards will be canceled before we leave this room. The keys to the apartment and the car are to be left on this table. You will not receive another dollar from me or any entity I control for the rest of your life. I suggest you find a job." Colton's face crumpled. The last vestiges of his arrogance dissolved into pure pathetic terror. "You can't do that," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You can't. I'm your son." "You were my son," Harlan corrected him, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Now, you are just a stranger who has caused me an immeasurable amount of pain." "Elias," he said, looking at my lawyer, "please have security escort this person out of the building." Elias Thorne nodded once and discreetly pressed a button under the conference table. Colton began to sob great gulping, ugly sounds. He looked at Alara. "Baby, please don't let them do this." Alara just stared at him, her face a mask of disgust and heartbreak. She didn't say a word. 2 large uniformed security guards entered the room. They moved with quiet efficiency, each taking one of Colton's arms. He didn't fight. All the energy had drained out of him. He was a puppet with its strings cut. They half walked, half dragged him out of the room, his pathetic sobs echoing down the hallway, until the heavy conference room door clicked shut, leaving the 4 of us in a sudden, profound silence. The heavy silence in the conference room was a vacuum, pulling all the remaining energy and emotion from the air. Harlan sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. Alara was quiet, her tears having traced clean paths through her makeup, her face a mask of shock and dawning grief. I looked at Harlan not with triumph, but with a weary sense of responsibility. This was not about destruction, it was about correction. It was about restoring balance to a system that had become dangerously unstable. Harlan, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Whitaker Innovations will continue to operate. I am not a CEO. I am an engineer. I have no interest in running your company. You built it, and you are the best person to lead it. This was never about tearing down what you have accomplished. It was about reminding you of the foundation it was all built upon. A flicker of something, perhaps gratitude, perhaps just sheer surprise, crossed his face. He looked up at me, his eyes red, rimmed, and exhausted. However, I continued, there will be some significant changes to the corporate structure and the distribution of its profits. The Lila Trust, as the majority shareholder, will be exercising its authority. Let's start with your son Elias. I said, turning to my lawyer, please draft the necessary legal documents. Colton Whitaker is to be permanently and irrevocably removed as a beneficiary from any and all Whitaker family trusts holdings and personal accounts controlled by his father. He is to be disinherited completely. He is to receive no further financial support, direct or indirect, from this point forward. He has been given every advantage in the world, and he has used it to become a cruel and arrogant man. Now he will be given the one advantage: he never had the opportunity to build a life on his own merits. He will learn the value of $1 by earning it. He will learn the value of respect by having none. He will learn what it is to be a man not by inheriting a fortune, but by forging a character. This is not a punishment. It is his last best chance at a meaningful life. Harlan nodded slowly, a silent, painful acceptance of his son's fate. It was a harsh verdict, but a necessary one. The rot had to be cut out completely. Next, we will address the Lila Trust itself, I went on. For 28 years, its profits have been reinvested, accumulating into a significant fortune. That purpose is now changing. Effective immediately, the trust will be restructured. 25% of all annual profits from Whitaker Innovations will be redirected into a new charitable foundation. This foundation will be named the Lila Fletcher Foundation for Young Innovators. It will provide scholarships, grants, and mentorship programs specifically for underprivileged African American students in the Boston area who wish to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. My wife Lila was a teacher. She believed that talent was everywhere, but opportunity was not. She would have wanted the wealth we created to be used not to build bigger mansions, but to build brighter futures. This money will now be used to give a new generation of brilliant young minds the chance that they might not otherwise have. It will be a legacy of opportunity, not of entitlement. It will be a testament to the idea that true worth comes from what you create, not what you inherit. Finally, I turned my attention to the most difficult part. I looked at my daughter, Elara, the remaining assets of the Lila Trust. The majority of this fortune will be placed into a new secondary trust in your name, I told her, my voice softening. But you will not have access to it, not yet. Elara looked up, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. But this time it was not shock, it was a flicker of understanding. I didn't do any of this to hurt you, I said. I did it to protect you. And that protection must continue. You have just ended a marriage that was based on a lie. Your judgment is clouded. You need to rediscover who you are away from the influence of wealth and the men it attracts. The conditions for you to access this trust are simple, but they are not negotiable. You will get a job, a real job, that pays a real wage. You will support yourself entirely on what you earn for a period of no less than 4 years. You will also be required to volunteer 80 hours per year at the new foundation to see firsthand the lives you have the power to change. After 4 years, if you have met these conditions, you will gain access to 1/4 of the trust. If you continue to maintain a stable, independent life for another 4 years, you will gain access to the rest. This money is a tool, Elara. It is not a crutch. I need to know that you can stand on your own 2 feet before I hand you the resources to move mountains. This is your test, the one that truly matters. Your chance to prove not to me, but to yourself that you are more than the life you almost chose. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just looked at me, the father she was only just beginning to know. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she slowly, deliberately nodded. 4 months passed. The autumn leaves had begun to fall, carpeting my small lawn in shades of gold and crimson. The world had moved on, and so had we. Alara had filed for divorce. I had learned from Elias that she had moved into a small apartment downtown and had found a job working for a local nonprofit that helped build community gardens. She hadn't called, and I hadn't pushed her. We both needed time to let the dust settle to find our footing in this new reality. Then one Sunday afternoon, her modest sedan pulled into my driveway. When she stepped out, I saw a different woman. She wore simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back without any fuss, and her face was free of the heavy makeup she used to wear. She looked tired, but she also looked lighter, more like the girl I remembered, the one who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty in the garden with me. She walked up to the porch holding a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Can I come in?" I nodded and held the door open for her. We sat in the living room, the same room where the long, painful journey had begun. She placed the package on the coffee table between us. "I wanted to bring you something," she said. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a thick, beautifully bound photo album with a leather cover. She opened it to the first page. It was a picture of my Lila on our wedding day, her smile so bright it seemed to generate its own light. Alara had spent weeks gathering old photos from relatives, restoring them and putting them together. Page after page was filled with my wife's life, our family's true history. It was the most precious gift I had ever received. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. "Not for the money, but for everything else. For not seeing you, for not defending you, for not being the daughter you and Mom raised me to be." I looked at my daughter, and for the first time in a very long time I saw her clearly, the real her, the good, kind person who had been buried under a mountain of insecurity and bad choices. "I know," I said, and I reached my hand across the table, palm up. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her hand in mine. Her grip was firm. It wasn't the hug of a child seeking comfort. It was the handshake of an equal, a new beginning built on the hard ground of truth. Later that evening, long after she had gone, I sat alone in my armchair. The photo album lay open on my lap, turned to my favorite picture of Lila laughing in our backyard. The house was quiet. A deep, profound peace had settled over it, a peace that had been absent for far too long. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded. The order had been restored. My wife's memory was now a force for good in the world, and my daughter was finally on the path to finding her own worth. My work was done. This whole experience taught me that a person's true worth is invisible to those who are blinded by the superficial glare of money and status. For years, I believed that living a simple life was the best way to protect my daughter. But I learned that character cannot simply be sheltered. It must be tested in the fires of real life. My quiet world, which my son-in-law saw as a sign of failure, was in fact my greatest strength. It gave me the clarity to see the truth. And I learned that sometimes creating a painful conflict is the only way to restore peace and dignity. Tell us in the comments below, what is the most important value a parent can teach their